Guys, I thought I would record a prep lecture for you guys for the respiratory system. The respiratory system is possible to do in a day, but the problem is that it's a little hard to absorb that quickly. So I thought if I got you guys started, you'd have a little more time to actually absorb the information and wouldn't feel so rushed. So my plan is that I will sort of do a preview of your notes, use this little animation to guide us through and stop it every once in a while and add some more detail. But first, um, let me remind you that if you don't remember the basic structure of the anatomy of the respiratory system, you should go look at it. And there's some points to look at there. And then let's just start out by looking at the big picture of the respiratory system. So it does what you think it does. Of course, it's trying to do primarily gas exchange, but I want to put it together in the bigger context. What's going to happen is you are going to be taking air, which contains more than just oxygen and carbon dioxide. You're going to be taking it in from the environment, from the atmosphere, and you're going to be doing that because of pressure changes in the lungs, which we'll talk about in just a minute. And then when the air gets in, these two gases are going to move down their concentration gradients. The first place that they are going to move is between the alveoli of the lungs and the pulmonary capillaries. So they're just going to move and diffuse down their concentration gradients. So basically, this pulmonary arterial blood that is going to the lungs from the heart is low oxygen and high carbon dioxide. And of course, the air that you're breathing in is high oxygen, low carbon dioxide. And so as the blood goes by the alveoli of the lungs, the gas exchange occurs via diffusion. Okay, so now I've got oxygenated blood. I'm going to send it back to the heart. I'm going to pump it out the left ventricle into systemic circulation. It's going to go through the systemic capillary beds. It's going to do the same thing. Diffuse down concentration gradients, only the concentration gradients will be different. But I want to put this together with the big picture of what we've been doing this semester. The reason the concentration gradient is different here is because I am delivering blood to systemic capillary beds. And these systemic capillary beds are surrounding tissue cells, which are undergoing metabolism. And as these tissue cells undergo metabolism, they are constantly gobbling up whatever oxygen you bring in and generating carbon dioxide. And they are, of course, doing this in the mitochondria via the process of cellular respiration, which this textbook and a lot of textbooks call internal respiration when you get to the respiratory system. So what I'm saying here is this is the entire source in the body of the concentration gradient for oxygen and carbon dioxide, because it's always using oxygen and it's always generating carbon dioxide. So what's going to happen is in the systemic capillary beds, as the blood comes by, that is high oxygen, low carbon dioxide, you can depend on the cells being lower oxygen, higher carbon dioxide. And so it is going to diffuse in. If a tissue is more metabolically active, then this is going to be even more dramatic, more carbon dioxide, less oxygen. So as you go through, basically you're going to drop off oxygen so that it can be used in the next round of cellular respiration. And then you are going to give up the carbon dioxide from the last round of cellular respiration. And then that carbon dioxide has to be delivered back to the heart and then back to the lungs, and then the entire thing goes around. So the big picture is that basically we have this entire process, which is called external respiration, and includes what's going on with the lungs, that's ventilation, and then what's going on at the pulmonary and systemic capillaries, and that is gas exchange. And then what is driving the entire thing is internal respiration. So I'm going to get you guys started by watching a little bit of the video, and I'll stop it every once in a while and put it together with some of the terminology in your notes.
Whether you're racing in a triathlon or doing something less strenuous, you need to breathe in oxygen to help you get energy, and breathe out carbon dioxide, a waste product. When you inhale, your diaphragm and rib muscles contract. increasing the volume of your lungs. When you exhale, these muscles relax, decreasing the volume of the lungs. When the lungs expand, air pressure in the lungs drops, causing air to flow into the lungs. When lung volume decreases, air pressure increases, causing air to flow out of the lungs.
Okay, so this process, really what it's doing is it's referring to this stuff right here. Pulmonary ventilation is what we're talking about here. Pulmonary ventilation is composed of two phases, inspiration, which is basically inhaling, and expiration, which is exhaling. And what we're doing is we're acknowledging the fact that air, like fluids, moves from high pressure to low pressure. And then the atmosphere around us is a relatively constant 760 millimeters of mercury. It doesn't really change dramatically. But what we can do is if we want air to move in versus out, we can change the pressure in the lungs. And so what we do in order to make that occur is if I take the thoracic cavity and I increase the size of the thoracic cavity, that decreases the pressure in the thoracic cavity. That's called Boyle's law. There's an inverse relationship between the size of a closed container and the pressure in a closed container. So if I increase the size of the container, it actually drops the pressure in the thoracic cavity below atmospheric pressure. And if you drop it below atmospheric pressure, then air will move in. And then to expire, all I have to do is relax the same muscles, which is primarily the diaphragm and the external intercostal muscles. And when I relax those, the size of the thoracic cavity decreases again. And then the pressure in the thoracic cavity increases above atmospheric pressure. And that is what will cause your exhalation. There is a way to do forced exhalation, but that is a different type of thing. Forced exhalation or forced expiration is when you use your internal intercostal muscles to push the ribs together a little further, which decreases the size of the thorax a little further. It's like when you're blowing out a birthday candle, like that's forced expiration. And you don't do it all the time. You do it when you're exercising or when you consciously do it. Okay, so this whole process is called pulmonary ventilation or ventilation. So let's talk about the path of air into the lungs.
Air enters the nose or mouth, moves down the trachea, and goes into the two bronchi. Air moves down smaller and smaller bronchioles until it reaches a tiny sac, an alveolus. Each alveolus is surrounded by capillaries. Oxygen diffuses from the alveolus to the blood, and carbon dioxide diffuses from the blood to the alveolus. As blood flows through the capillary, it becomes rich in oxygen.
Okay, so that is the process that is going on right here. It is the process just after pulmonary ventilation, which is the first step of gas exchange right here, which occurs at the pulmonary capillaries. That's what they were talking about there. And then this part is going to talk about how oxygen is actually transported through the bloodstream, but you already kind of know that. You already kind of know that it's transported inside red blood cells, primarily on hemoglobin. This is going to give you a visual of that.
In the blood, oxygen diffuses into a red blood cell and binds to hemoglobin, a protein made up of 4 subunits. One oxygen molecule can bind to each subunit. Oxygen-rich blood flows from the lungs to the heart. Which pumps this blood to capillaries all over the body.
Okay, so now we are going to be here and see what happens here.
Here, we see oxygen diffusing from a capillary's red blood cells into a muscle cell. Oxygen is used by the cell's mitochondria to produce ATP during cellular respiration. Carbon dioxide is released. How does carbon dioxide leave the body?
Okay, so sorry, that's my son. So they gave you just sort of a quick start on how oxygen is transported, which is exactly the way that you thought it was transported inside red blood cells on hemoglobin. That's not how all of it's transported, but we'll get to that on Monday. Um, and then how carbon dioxide is transported. This part is where it gets a little sticky. So let's go down and find it in your notes so that you will know where this is referring to. Okay. Okay, this is oxygen transport in the blood, and this will be carbon dioxide transport in the blood. Okay, so right here, carbon dioxide. Okay, so only some of carbon dioxide travels from the tissues back to the heart and back to the lungs as CO2. The rest of it is actually temporarily transformed into the bicarbonate ion, which is this guy right here, which you've seen a million times. So let's look at what's going to happen, and I'll give you a little introduction to this.
Carbon dioxide diffuses from cells into capillaries. Some carbon dioxide stays in the plasma, the liquid part of the blood.
Okay, so 7% stays dissolved in the plasma, that's right there.
Most carbon dioxide, however, enters red blood cells. Some carbon dioxide binds to hemoglobin.
So that's this part right here. 23% of the carbon dioxide you're carrying binds to hemoglobin and forms carbaminohemoglobin. So hemoglobin can actually carry oxygen and carbon dioxide.
The rest is converted to bicarbonate, which diffuses into the plasma.
So pause for just a second and I want you to look at that. This is something that's good to have a visual on. So here's what happens. You force this chemical equation, and that happens inside the red blood cells, and I'll show you guys how it happens in class. So what the red blood cells do is force carbon dioxide into H plus and HCO3 minus. And then the red blood cell itself, and specifically, will hold on to the H plus so that the pH change is not as dramatic as you would expect in the systemic capillaries. And then what it does is it pushes the HCO3 minus back out into the blood plasma. So it's got a buffering effect. And so you're carrying boatloads of carbon dioxide without major changes in pH. So that's going to be the point. But please remember that HCO3 minus is, as far as you know and I know, not a gas. So you're not going to be able to bring that back to breathe that out at the lungs. So what I predict is that you're going to have to do the reverse when you get to the lungs and turn it back into carbon dioxide.
The bicarbonate, which diffuses into the plasma. This oxygen-poor blood flows back to the heart,
Going here.
which pumps it to the lungs. There, carbon dioxide diffuses from the plasma into the alveolus. Bicarbonate enters red blood cells and is converted back to carbon dioxide.
Okay, so now what's going to happen is in the lungs, the entire process is reversed. I take that HCO3 minus that I made to temporarily hold on to all of that. I take the H plus and combine it with it. I was holding on to it inside the red blood cell, and I force this equation this direction because now I end up with water and CO2, which I can breathe out.
Carbon dioxide is also released from hemoglobin.
That's that one right there.
Carbon dioxide diffuses out of the red blood cells, into the plasma, and into the alveolus. When you exhale, air flows out of your lungs. And that's how you release carbon dioxide, get oxygen, and keep on running.
Okay, so that's a short preview. I'm going to, I updated these notes just slightly, and I'm going to re-upload them for you guys. It's not dramatically changed, it's just a little simplified. I will re-upload those for you to use. And then for those of you who really want to get a little better prepared so that you're really not overwhelmed on Monday, remember that you can, and maybe should, I don't know, go watch the previous semester's respiratory system lecture, and then you will feel like you've already heard it once. And Monday will be kind of relaxed and just confirming and letting you have time to ask questions. The only thing that I'm not sure that we will get to on Monday, but I will try, is the clinical connections, the sort of pathophysiology situation. So I'll do my best to get to that, and maybe I will be able to because you guys have already sort of started this. I'm trying to come up with a worksheet for you for respiratory system, but I'm not sure that's going to happen. I'll work on it for an hour or two more and see if I can come up with something that is helpful and makes sense. And if so, I will post that. If not, then this will be enough for you guys to get started. So I hope you have a good weekend. There are, under assignments and announcements, there are also some worksheets that I put up for you to review cardiovascular physiology and also to review urinary physiology.